Hello everyone, and thank you for joining the first Wilder Together in the Stour Valley webinar. The topic is on how to connect to your community for wildlife action. My name is Amy and I work at RSPB Flatford Wildlife Garden. If you have got any questions throughout the webinar, please pop them into the chat bar. We should have some time at the end where we can answer your questions, and if not, we will email you back. The first section is going to be with Emma Black from the Dedham Vale ANOB, and she's going to be discussing barriers that you could be facing. The first section is interactive, so if you can go to the chat bar and open that up, and there is a poll in there, and can you click on the poll and vote for all the barriers that you think you are currently facing? Oops, so we've got somebody voted. We've got not knowing where to start, not knowing who the land belongs to. We'll just wait for a couple more of you to vote and then Emma can start.
Okay, I think I'm going to share my presentation, and if anybody wants to put anything in the chat box and say any of the barriers that they're facing, we can have a look at those later on after the presentations. So I'm just going to share my presentation on what I think some of the barriers are that you may be facing. Okay. Thank you for taking part in that quick survey, and apologies if the technology didn't work for you. So there are lots of barriers that stop us getting involved in community wildlife projects. And I've put up a slide here, and we sort of start at the top left-hand side and we're going to go round. So there's a lot of enthusiasm out there. We've all heard about the climate and biodiversity crisis, and we all want to do something, but many of us don't have any ideas about what to do or where to start. And we've got lots of ideas, some of us, but again, don't know what to do next. So really, it's about knowing who to speak to about this. Are there other people in your local area that feel the same, that want to do something? Is there a wildlife group already, lucky you, that you can join in with? What are the parish council doing? Do they have anything that's going on locally? The most important thing is communication. It's really crucial, whether that's through social media, whether that's through a poster on your notice board or in the parish magazine, trying to sort of gauge whether people locally are interested and want to do something, and arranging a meetup to discuss. The next thing that's also quite important to know is, what land is there? Is it public? Is it private? How do you find out that? Maybe speak to your parish council. They may have some land. Quite a few parish councils do have land, recreation grounds, allotments, commons, greens, local green spaces, but others don't. So you have to do things differently. Maybe doing more with gardens and streets, such as a hedgehog friendly village project or a Swift project. A lot of people may not have the knowledge or know how to go about implementing wildlife projects, and they might be worried that they'll damage existing habitat. So that's a big barrier. Also, they may not have the skills, maybe not being very practical, maybe they don't have the tools. So part of your communications could be a skills audit to find out what skills people have so you can bring people in to do different things within your project. If you're part of the Wilder Together in the Stour Valley project, we have a document with lots of links to all sorts of wildlife projects and information, and we can send you that. And don't forget, you've got us here who can help you. There are so many things that you can do in your local area, and sometimes it gets very overwhelming. So, what to focus on? Start small and build up. You can't do everything all at once. And again, we're all very busy people, so time is a big barrier. It's good to share out responsibility of projects. And when you do have an event, make it fun, make it short, provide refreshments, and then hopefully people will come back and want to get involved. And one of the major barriers is obviously money, having some funding. Where do you get that to do some of the projects that you might want to do? So certainly with the Dedham Vale A&B and Stour Valley project, we have a fund that you can access, but there's lots of other places you can get money and also gifts in kind, such as trees through the Woodland Trust, and maybe your locality fund for your parish or town council. So there are lots of barriers, and these can be very overwhelming. So you don't end up doing anything. But we're in a massive biodiversity and climate crisis, and we need to do something. You may well have heard of 30 by 30. This is a target the conservation community has set to have 30% of land connected and protected for nature recovery by 2030. We all need to take action. We all need to just take the first step and work together to make more space for nature. So good luck, and hopefully you'll be able to overcome some of those barriers with our help and working together in your local community.
Thank you, Emma. I think there were some really helpful things there, and sorry for some of you if the poll wasn't working. If you have got any barriers, then you can pop them in the chat bar instead. And next we are going to hear from Kathy Smith from Suffolk Wildlife Trust, and she's going to talk about some of the visions that you may be able to include within your community to help wildlife.
Okay, can we see that, Amy?
Yes, Kathy.
Super. Okay, I'll carry on then. Just wanted to check. Okay, so Emma's touched on a few really good ideas, and as she said, it can be daunting. There can be lots of possibilities, lots of different voices in there. So it's partly about working out what the priorities are, both for the people in your parish and for the wildlife. And it may indeed be for swifts. If you've got recorded screaming parties in your parish and good swift numbers, then we can help them together with the Suffolk Swift Project and the AOMB. We can help you get swift boxes up to boost the colonies, as they're communal nesters, and nesting spaces are often lost when buildings are restored. And Emma again touched on the idea that some parish councils, not all, do own or manage land. And the question then is, do you actually know what conditions it is in? Is it in favourable management for wildlife, or is it purely amenity at the moment? Are there little corners maybe that you could put aside to rewild for wildlife? What's the connectivity like? We talk about wildlife corridors here. Can the wildlife move from one place to the other? That's really, really important if we're to support some of our most endangered species. Could that land be enhanced for biodiversity? Just as I mentioned earlier, is it in favourable management? Is there anything, small tweaks very often, that can be done to help? And following on from that, about knowing what condition it's in, have you got some sort of surveying or regular monitoring in place? And a little note at the bottom there that whilst we are keen to plant, tree planting has its place in the biodiversity and climate change crisis. If we've got a species-rich grassland, then we need to think about whether that's the right thing to do in that situation. And again, we come back to hedgehogs. this is a really good one if you don't own land. Hedgehogs generally are favourably thought of by residents. People like to see them in their gardens. They're nature's pest controller, so they help remove things that perhaps gardeners are concerned about, like slugs. And there's some really simple things that we can all do to help them. And there's been some really good, positive, hedgehog-friendly villages. East Berkholt was one of them, where we've learnt from what they've done that's really got people on board in their village, and some really simple actions here, even things that most people, although we would rather not have to do it, things like litter picking. Hedgehogs get snarled up in litter, very badly injured from things like elastic bands. Just going for a litter pick, it's going to serve multiple purposes, and help hedgehogs too. But of course, if we can create habitat, we can link that habitat again through gaps under garden fences or gates, then we're really going to make a big difference for what is a rapidly declining species, particularly in the wide countryside. In suburbia, it's sort of beginning to plateau and hold its own a bit. And I think there was one of the polls that somebody said that we didn't know who owned the land, and that can be a tricky one. But there are farm clusters around, so if you're wanting to engage with farmers, one of the conversations is, are you part of a farm cluster? Did you know a farm cluster exists? And those are working very well in the Stour, and there's also one in the wall towns. There are things that can happen, like pond restoration, hedgerow surveys, and potentially gapping up for lovely creatures like this dormouse. They really, really need those gaps in the hedges filled in. Suffolk Wildlife Trust advise on land that's along river corridors. And the other thing that as a parish council you can really influence is if you've got a neighbourhood plan group, if you've got a steering group, make sure that environmental assessments and wildlife are really high up the agenda in that neighbourhood plan. And some opportunities coming our way as well for wildlife is biodiversity net gain, which is coming through the planning system and already being implemented. Coming back to setting those priorities again, it's again coming back to what are the local priority species. We're in a hotspot for stag beetles, so that would be quite a big priority in a lot of areas for putting in stag beetle pyramids. You might find that as I say earlier, you're in a good place for swifts. Who are the stakeholders? Who really matters? Who cares what happens where they live or work? So remember, businesses, they can be really valuable stakeholders in supporting projects. And what are the easy wins? As Emma's saying, there's low-lying fruit, the things that people will generally buy into, that will make a big difference without costing a lot or taking a huge amount of time. And then that all important action plan, who's going to do what, where are they going to do it, and importantly, when are they going to do it? And I've just put on that Team Wilder hashtag, which the Wildlife Trusts have adopted, as that is having 1 in 4 people doing something for wildlife, taking action for wildlife, and that is thought of as a tipping point where taking action for wildlife becomes the norm. So linking closely with that 30% of land in recovery for nature too. Okay, that's over to now, back to Amy.
Thank you, Kathy. Lots of really good ideas and suggestions there for people to take on board to help. And next up, we're going to be hearing from Councillor Jonathan Hunt, an inspiring talk about what's been happening in Boxted.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Can you hear me okay? Very good. All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amy, for the introduction, and thank you to the Wilder Together team for the invitation to come and speak today. So, as you said, I'm Jonathan Hunt, a parish councillor for Boxted in Essex. And if anyone isn't aware of Boxted, we're just 5 minutes north of Colchester, and our parish spans into the Dedham Vale AONB. In fact, the northern parish boundary is the Stour River itself. So we're intrinsically linked to the AONB. My brief for this short presentation was, what have you done to engage with your community? And I hope to approach that from two directions. Firstly, how did we approach the task of forming a wildlife group in the first place? And then secondly, how has that wildlife group gone on to engage with our community? I myself am a professional geologist and I have a keen interest in the natural world. And when I joined the parish council at the start of 2021, I expressed that interest and I thought I might be able to offer something to the parish council with regard to that. And at the time, members of our community had seen the great work that Wivenhoe had been doing and still are doing with their rewilding of verges and public spaces. And people had come to the parish council and asked if they had any plans to do anything similar. So I was asked sort of there and then, would I be interested in setting up a team of volunteers to explore what we could do in Boxted with a similar vision? And so getting that green light from a group like a local authority, it could be a real barrier for some people, but we were fortunate that the parish council was looking for someone to set up such a group. As Emma said, communication is very important. And as a village, we're quite fortunate to have a number of different newsletters, some in print, some by email, and also a whole range of different social media pages and groups. And I'm sure that's probably the same for a lot of villages or areas these days. So a really good opportunity there to get the word out. And so therefore it was relatively easy to spread that word and say, hey, we're looking for volunteers to form a group, and would you like to be involved? Are you passionate or interested? Do you have any skills that might lend themselves to a group such as ourselves? And so, for example, a small article in the local email newsletter, such as this pictured here, with just an eye-grabbing picture of some local wild verges and just a call to arms to get people to volunteer to the group. It was several months before we actually convened a meeting of interested volunteers, and when that did take place, which I think was in sort of early October 2021, there was about 12 people in attendance in that group, which is quite good for a village the size of Boxted. And we've met more or less once a month ever since then. Although the numbers that meet on a monthly basis have dwindled slightly down from 12, I'd say there's still a good core, sort of 6 or 8 people that turn up each month as part of our group. And we were very fortunate to be given a sort of an initial project to get our teeth into as a group, which was the newly acquired village green at Boxted Cross. We already had a budget for this assigned by the parish council. So again, perhaps bad examples here because these are barriers that other people have that we were very fortunate not to have. We had a budget available to us to do some work straight away to the village green. This green was part of a new housing development that was then handed over to the village for a sort of a peppercorn, and but it wasn't quite delivered by the developers in the condition it was initially intended. So that gave the group a kind of blank canvas to really get started with something, to plan, to rejuvenate and to introduce aspects to that green that were important to the group, namely aspects that would aid the biodiversity and conservation of the area, again in line with the group's vision of producing a more biodiversity rich and conserved natural environment within Boxted. And so as such, the main focus of that work on the green was to introduce 2 large swathes of wildflower meadow and to also replant the hedgerows and the various other areas on the green to the sort of specification they were meant to be provided in. So just a few quick visual examples of our village green. Here's a picture taken in October of that year in 2021, along with our plans for the area that we intended to turn to wildflower. And then just another view of that as we began cutting and scarifying our wildflower meadow areas. Unfortunately, we didn't quite have the benefit of time to follow the true conservation approach, to literally just wait and see what might come up. We did actually actively plant and seed a variety of native species into our green. And the reason for that being that we really needed to impress the village with this new village green. Particularly, we needed some immediate results, really for the benefit of those people that do tend to confuse wild and natural with scruffy and unkempt. And we wanted to make it really clear that we were managing an area here for the benefit of the village. And so in many ways, it was kind of a public relations exercise to produce something that could be vibrant and exciting as soon as possible. I was really fortunate in leading this group that there was a core group of about 3 volunteers who really took the reins on the village green, drove it forwards with passion and with a true eye on conservation. And those volunteers drew up the planning schedules, they organised the purchasing of resources, and they arranged working parties that the rest of the group assisted with. And just sort of fruits of labour is the more recent pictures when we recently mowed and tidied the green. And as you can see, the bulb areas have really sprung into life in the last few weeks. And the general condition of the mown areas of grass is much better, whilst the wildflower areas are now host to a whole range of different species. And just some snapshots here of various different species of flowering plant that are cropping up on our green, and a few little action photos there of some of the group members getting really stuck into tending to that green. So that first part sort of wraps up how the group came to be, from inception as a parish council working group through to sort of tackling our first task of working on a village green. And like I say, maybe some of the barriers other people face, we were fortunate to overcome, but we still had to go through the same process of looking for volunteers, getting them interested, and then keeping them interested, finding out what their particular interests are, what their skills are, and keeping them busy doing what they want to do. So then moving on to sort of how does the group now engage with the community and feedback to the community, which is the second part I wanted to talk about. So we were fortunate last year to be granted some funds from the Dedham Vale AOMB Sustainable Development Fund, which has been mentioned just now. And we proposed to the AOMB what we called the B4 project, which was the boxed birds, bugs and bees. And this was to centre around the work that we'd conducted on the green, because after all, that's what all that work was for, to increase our biodiversity, but to expand upon it and engage with our community, to discuss with them and to inform them why a wildlife group is valuable to the village, like why do we even exist. And so at this point, I should note that we were originally formed as the Boxed Biodiversity and Sustainability Working Group, which is a bit of a mouthful. And whilst very descriptive of what the group is about, we did come to realise that actually that wasn't particularly understandable or relatable for a lot of people. And so we'd kind of formed a barrier to our own success in that we'd come up with a name for our group, which really wasn't engaging with our community. And the more we spoke to people and tried to organise events and started this AOMB funded project, we soon realised we kind of needed to rebrand. And so we ended up with Boxed Wildlife, and I have here on the screen our current kind of business card or flyer that we would hand out at events, or that we put on the back of most of our sort of press releases. And the new rebranding of Boxed Wildlife is just so much simpler and straight to the point, which really helps with engagement. So carrying on with the B4 project, which we had grant funding for from the AOMB, our plans for that evolved over time, but in the end it settled on being a youth-focused set of activities. But we did throw in there one sort of expert talk by the well-renowned conservationist Chris Gibson of Wivenhoe. And here's some examples of flyers and advertising we put out for our events. And again, very fortunate that there's another little core group of volunteers of about 3 people sprung up from within the group and really wanted to take hold of this project and run with it. And they really worked tirelessly to dream up, imagine and plan activities that might entice families and children out to enjoy wildlife with us. And despite the rain of our first activity day, which was advertised there on the left, which was held on the village green, we still attracted something over 70 attendees to come out into the rain and get to know what we were doing. So that was really great. Our activity days that we organised consisted of quite a few popular craft activities, but all with wildlife or natural themes. So these were things such as leaf rubbing, colouring and painting, fingerprinting, bug and bee hotel design and decoration, and then some more practical activities activities for learning and development, such as bird feeder making, pine cone fat ball making, owl pellet dissection was a particular favourite, and then some slightly more educational things such as quizzes and treasure hunts to sort of test people's knowledge of the natural world. At the October event in particular, we were grateful to have Emma, who's just spoken to you earlier, in attendance on behalf of the AOMB, and with her resources and tools in tow to help monitor the construction of a large bug hotel and also a stag beetle pyramid, which are now proudly sited on our village green. And just for some proof, there's Emma there in the middle with a bunch of the local children enjoying themselves putting together the stag beetle pyramid. And to the right there, a little sort of cottage industry of people that turned out to weave some bird feeders out of willow, which was fantastic to see. And just a few more pictures from that same day in October. Here's the bug hotel being constructed on the left, and a few people on the right there engaging in our treasure hunt and quiz around the edges of the village green. So it took a surprising amount of thought and attention to detail to organise those activity events, and far more than we thought it was going to take when we first proposed them. So again, I'm very grateful to the volunteers who drove that project forward, and then the many other volunteers who helped on the day to actually facilitate the event. When we held it again in winter, but undercover this time in the village hall, it actually completely smashed our expectations again. We estimate nearly 200 attendees over the course of a 4-hour period. We stopped counting at 100, but 200 is the best estimate. And just some examples of that. Here was our set of stalls we laid out in the village hall, each with various different activities on each one, and then the kind of the main activity of the day, the hall was more or less full for the entire 4 hours. And again, Emma came down with her group of volunteers who I've forgotten the name of their group, unfortunately. Sorry, Emma, but they got stuck in with what you can see there is them designing and building some mini bug hotels. So fantastic events, and what I think really drove our success on those was the publicity and marketing that we were able to do for those. And so I showed you an example before of some flyers, and here's an example of the flyers we put out for the winter event. So as well as putting out digital information through the various different channels we had available to us, we also did invest in doing a physical leaflet drop. And we felt this was beneficial because in this sort of age of relentless information overload, sometimes just having a physical piece of paper in your hand that you can stick to the fridge or hang on a whiteboard, that can really sort of stand out. But we did, of course, pay extra to get the recycled printed materials, so we didn't want to go just adding more and more carbon burden. So following on from the success of those activity days, we've then put together a series of posters to show what we did and to advertise that we're hoping to run those activity days again. And these are great resources now that we now bring out at any event that we go to or are involved in to show what we're about. So that's a real benefit for us. So as the group continues to this day with some smaller scale things, such as organising monthly village walks, which is as simple as just putting a set of dates out there and revising them once a month with new dates. And also, in addition to that, the group is planning a big sort of village cleanup on the 29th of April, the week before the King's coronation, to get the village really sort of spick and span for that. And so we're looking forward to organising that. In addition, a number of the group, well, the core volunteers who helped organise the B4 project have not rested on their laurels at all. They've gone straight on to their next objective, which is a Help for Hogs campaign. You heard references earlier to the hedgehog friendly villages schemes, and sort of following on from the success of East Burgolt, our group is really keen to follow that initiative. So they've put together a program of events to help raise the profile of hedgehogs in the village, and particularly inform people of the threats that they face and educate on how best they can help with them. And some example Facebook posts here that they've put out looking for volunteers or looking for people who are interested in hedgehogs, and they continue to put out that sort of information on Facebook to this day and going forwards into the rest of the program. And In addition to that, and just a small plug here, we have a talk scheduled for 2 weeks' time on the 18th of April, and that's open to all, being held at Boxted Village Hall. And in addition to that, the wildlife group is also going to be running a number of activities that are hedgehog related, that will be forming part of our village's coronation party on the 6th of May. So a great opportunity to collaborate with other village groups to be a part of something bigger, and just to bring our wildlife perspective to a larger village event. And so I'm well over my sort of scheduled amount of time for this talk, but I did want to finish with sort of my 3 key sort of observations or learnings from the last 18 months of kind of chairing this group. I've whittled it down from 5 or 6 that I had initially to what I think are my 3 main ones. The first one is the volunteers themselves. The volunteers are everything to a group, and if you are hoping to be or planning to be a group chair or leader or whatever you happen to call yourself, then as Emma said earlier, you really cannot do everything, and you really cannot do everything at once. So it's delegation to your volunteers is key. But again, as Emma said, and echoing all her words here, that sort of skills audit of what your volunteers can do, and also kind of a visions audit. What do your volunteers want to do? Because there's no point trying to make people do things they don't want to do, because at the end of the day, if it's voluntary, they're using their time to do it, so they want to do what they want to do, which is great when you can make that happen. And my second point is go for the low-hanging fruit. As I mentioned, we've restarted the village walks that apparently used to be a thing in this village before I got here, and it was very simple just to restart that and get people back out walking, enjoying. People who perhaps feel that they can't just go for a walk on their own, or they're insecure about going for a walk on their own, they find it great to be able to get together one weekend a month and walk with a group of like-minded villagers. So pick off don't go for the biggest project you can possibly think of. Perhaps pick the low-hanging fruit first and build from there. And then my third and final most important point is to not give up. It's never going to be easy, but if you reevaluate or change tack if you need to, but stopping is the worst thing any of us could do. So the fact that you're here listening to this is a fantastic first step. So I wish you all the best success, and again, thank the organisers for inviting me to speak here, and hand back over to Amy.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and it's absolutely wonderful to hear about all the things that are happening in Boxted, and I hope it gives everybody an idea of how you really can connect to your community and some of the things that you can do and how you can help wildlife at the same time. And just a quick reminder, if you have got any questions, please put them into the chat bar. And lastly, we're going to be hearing from Danielle Carbot from Essex Wildlife Trust, and she's going to be talking to you about the different community groups that you would be able to set up.
Thanks very much, Amy. And yeah, so now we've talked about what action to take and how to take it, with some fantastic examples from Boxted Parish Council. Thank you, Jonathan. We wanted to highlight the different types of community groups that can be set up or engaged with to achieve this. So although our focus is very much on conservation, taking action for wildlife, as Jonathan suggested, it is often the kind of engagement piece that makes it a success. And this is certainly something I'm consistently seeing across Essex when meeting community and councils through our Team Wilder work. So on the screen here, you can see some examples, and although not an exhaustive list, give a good outline of some of the different types. And first, I'll be diving into the more formal community structures, and I've listed most of those there on the little hexagon diagram. And one of the most, I suppose, most used and more traditional setups is the Friends of groups. And that's a group of people who look after, improve and care a public green space for the benefit of wildlife and people. So in most cases, these groups are linked to the local authority and voluntarily sort of support, enhance and promote the overall maintenance and management of the space. And these can be, you know, things like parks, gardens, recreational grounds, churchyards, allotments and so on. So it's quite varied. And although linked to the council more often than not, and often covered by the council's public liability insurance and so on, friends of groups can also become constituted and therefore have the ability to obtain their own insurance and open bank accounts themselves as well. So it's a really good sort of formal setup to take action in spaces where you might be looking at, developing or launching a project. And I'll be going into how to become constituted in a more detail later on. For more in-depth information around Friends of Groups, there is also a fantastic national federation, and I think there's over 7,000 Friends of Groups in that across the UK. They want to see an active Friends of Group for every public green space, and so they've got some great resources to pull on. So I would definitely recommend, if a Friends of Group is what you're looking for, to look at that National Federation website. The other more sort of formal structures are also things like resident association groups. And although not always connected to public green spaces, these associations can make a real difference to a community. And they're often there to address issues of community concern and can act as that voice for residents within a local area. Often they are a formal group made up of people living in the same area or the same street or even the same village. I'm currently working with 2 across Essex, and it has proved to be a fantastic way of reaching local residents in that area and promoting wildlife action. And that certainly relates to things like hedgehog campaigns and swift projects, actions that maybe people want to be taking in their own spaces, in their own locality and gardens. Within sort of resident associations, although it's not always linked to wildlife action, improving and enhancing public green spaces could be the main mission for a resident association group. And it would be really important, as we've just sort of said, creating that link between the community and the wildlife awareness, for example, or a link between the community and the green spaces, sort of bringing back that love of where they live, getting that buy-in from the community. They want to be involved in that. They want to know what's happening on their doorstep and seeing what's happening in their own locality. Other forms of formal groups can also include, green groups, eco groups, nature and wildlife groups with specific local names. And these, again, are all often constituted but have specific aims around climate and biodiversity. And I can't obviously go into each one of those because they are, very bespoke to the area and the people that have formed them. But they can be a fantastic way of, bringing wildlife action to your area. And overall, I think formal structures can be really beneficial if you're really focusing on kind of creating that management of a group, leadership within a group, and having clear aims. If that's something that's important to you as a council or a councillor, or a group that's working with the council, formal structures can be a great way of doing that and creating mission statements. Participation, however, often relies on signing up or becoming a member, which can be a little inflexible when sort of managing participation with small groups. But overall, it certainly provides, I think anyway, a clear platform for change. And it enables things like events, fundraisers, work parties, pretty much any activity to take place, which of course can be really helpful in action. Might include things like tree planting, grassland management, hedge laying, and so on. And, if you've been inspired by some of Jonathan's examples, becoming constituted would be, and having a formal group to do that would be fantastic. So let's just dive in then to being constituted. And I'm sure lots of you already know about this, but it's always a kind of a good thing to have a refresh, and also to think of it from the point of view of maybe that community or voluntary group who are thinking about it, because it certainly can seem like an overwhelming process. So I'm just going to briefly set out the key steps needed in order to achieve it. And, a pre-warning, often discussions around it can be a little bit dry, so bear with me. Generally, it's important to remember the reason behind the action is often much more inspiring. And for me anyway, community or voluntary groups, when they become constituted, have great power to affect change. And in many cases, it actually can bolster the aims and the outcomes. So first step, forming a committee. No matter how many people there is to begin with in a community or voluntary group or project teams, to become constituted, a committee must be formed, and it must comprise of the following. So chair, vice chair, secretary and treasurer. The legal structure of the community or voluntary group also needs to be decided. I think there was a diagram on my last slide there, either unincorporated or incorporated. Although it is possible to change that later on, it is best to do it right at the beginning. And I'll just quickly go into the differences there. Unincorporated, this is simply a group of individuals working together. So it's the slightly easier way of becoming constituted. You don't need to register as a charity because that's only applicable if your income is above 5,000, which I doubt it is. And there are many, many, many voluntary groups in this category. It's an easy way to set up a group with fewer complications. The only downside of unincorporated groups is that the people in the group or the voluntary group are liable, as it doesn't exist in its own entity in its own right. But this is the type of constituted voluntary group I'll be covering today, as it's the most relevant. But just quickly and for information, incorporated, this is where your voluntary group exists as a legal entity from the individuals belonging to it. So things like a community interest company, sorry. I'll not be going into that today, but there's lots of information out there if a community interest company or something that's incorporated is of interest to you. So going back to incorporated, and once a committee has been formed, a constitution should be considered. As many of you will already know, this is essentially a set of rules that becomes the governing document to ensure decisions are made in a democratic way. It may also be called a terms of reference, and this is really important, particularly when thinking about the aims of your group. It also tells potential funders how business is conducting and what the group hopes to achieve. So it's pretty important, particularly as a group that's maybe just starting out and needs that money to get something going, to have that constitution in place so funders can have a look at it and rely on it. Many funders do ask to see this before awarding, so it's just something to keep in mind. But there are many templates around, so don't feel like you have to make it from scratch. I would highly recommend the Parks Communities template, and I've just popped on their logo. They've got one that you can just have a look at and input your details in and change and amend as you want to. Additionally, in order to receive funding or donations or grants, community or voluntary groups need to open a bank account in the group's name. From a chat with the Parks community back in 2020, they sort of shortlisted some favoured banks by volunteer groups, and that was Unitary Trust, Lloyd's, the Cooperative Bank, Tide and Munzo. I know obviously we're now in 2023 and things are a tad different, but they're good ones to have a look at. But I'd always recommend comparing and contrasting where possible. You know, banks require proof that community or voluntary groups are indeed voluntary and not a private business. So it's just something to keep in mind and look up if that's the route you're going down. And that's yeah, pretty much everything needed to get that constituted group set up, that formal structure. And then on the screen here, I've just sort of put everything in a flowchart for you. I've covered most of it. Obviously, there's also the drawing up of a budget and actually applying for funding. And then I know everyone here will know what an AGM is, so I won't go through that today. But yeah, that's a really easy kind of structure of how to get going, something you can support your community or groups with. In many cases, it might be the first time they've looked into it. Other documents that are relevant include health and safety procedures, safeguarding policies, data protection, GDPR policies, and then anything else that might be relevant, like conflict of interest and expenses. And again, there are a number of templates and models out there. So all of that sounds really overwhelming, particularly if it's a new community group that are looking at wildlife action in your area. But again, there's many examples out there. So please, yeah, tell your groups, or if you're doing one yourself, not to make these from scratch. You can find them and look at them and use them. If you're a local council or a councillor, I'm sure you've already got many expertise in this area. So sharing this with your community group is always really helpful. It's also worth thinking about insurance, specifically public liability insurance. As I mentioned before, some formal structures are covered underneath their local council, but that's always kind of on a case-by-case basis. Similarly, with risk assessments as well, it's also something for community groups to look at, something we'll be looking at in our kind of in-person workshop as well. But that relates to the public liability insurance that any group or community group take out. And that's probably enough talk about formal structures, but in some cases there are also informal structures, community groups that are sort of just a network of people or a movement of people that want to take action. This could be a litter picking group, a campaigning group, a wildlife spotting group, or just some form of society or setup that have a main aim but don't necessarily want to go down that formal route or become constituted. They don't have constitutions, they don't have committees or bank accounts, so they can often be limited in what they achieve. However, they tend to be sort of formed through those grassroots movements, and can still be really, really effective for both wildlife and people. So I'm sure some of you on this call today can think of some of those sort of more informal groups that might be popping up in your area or exist in your area that would be really good to get in contact with. They've already got the passion there, they might even already have the knowledge there that you can dip into, and they're just a really good sort of way of getting into your local area, talking to local residents, and getting an idea of what that community voice is. And if you get a chance to talk to people in some of these sort of more informal groups, they might be able to share the story for you, or promote what you're doing as a council or a local councillor. They might be able to help encourage other people to maybe have wilder gardens. They might be able to campaign for swifts for you, create online forums, and so on. So although having a formal structure is really helpful, that informal side of it is something to think about as well. And just thinking about that in terms of grassroots as well, often they are focused truly on kind of the development of the community, with a heavy emphasis on relationship building. And it's going back to that wildlife action as an engagement piece as well. Building a formal structured group without doing that background work, that sort of talking to your local residents and building those relationships, and thinking about, you know, what everyone's interested in. Are they interested in hedgehogs or swifts, or are they interested in looking at their recreational grounds? Grassroots groups can be, you know, really good at actually understanding what people are interested in, and actually what's going to work, because not everything's going to work. And as Emma said, it's best not to try everything. It's best to, you know, try something that people are interested in, give it a go, and see what happens from there. So it's definitely something to think about. And of course, with formal and informal structures, it also depends on you as a council as to what you're looking to achieve. So there's no right or wrong answer in here. It's just the varying sort of different types of setups that there might be. And I hope that gives everyone a brief insight into the types of community and voluntary groups that can be formed and engaged with. And I think that takes us to perfect timing. So yeah, thanks everyone. If you've got any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them, because I know that can sound a little bit overwhelming just via a webinar.
Thanks, Danielle. So it's now time for the questions. We've finished with everybody giving their chats. So if you have got any questions, please put them in the chat bar. We have had one from Gary and Carol, and they wanted to know if there's funding available in Essex similar to the Dedham Vale ANOB SDF grant. So do you know, Danielle?
I'm happy to answer this. I can send through Gary and Carol a list of lots of different funding that's available in Essex at the moment, if that's useful. I think, Amy, we're going to put our emails in the chat box, aren't we? But yeah, there's lots of other funding available in Essex. I don't know, Emma, if you'll be able to kind of give us an outline of what's happening in Dedham AOMB at the moment, to see what I can think of the top of my head that might be similar.
So the Dedham Vale Sustainable Development Fund grant is only for the Dedham Vale AOMB, which is the area east of Bures to Catawade, but that's on the Suffolk and Essex side. We also have the Stour Valley Environment Fund, which is beyond sort of Bures, going all the way up towards the Thurlows, both on the Suffolk and Essex side as well. So if you are within our AONB or the Stour Valley project area, you can access our funding, and all the details are on our website.
And I think, as just a brief extra there, the Wild Isles have just brought out some funding that's RSPB led. I think the limit to that is 5,000, but a really great one because I think it's focuses on community action for wildlife.
Okay, we've just got a question in here from Colin, and he's put, if constituted, does organ, I'm not quite sure what that word means. I don't know if anybody else can read that. Or if Colin wants to come on and ask his question.
Again, Amy, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions about becoming constituted. So more than happy for Colin to email me if that's easier.
And then I think we've got some people typing some questions, so we'll just wait for those. So while so Sharon has asked, can we apply for grants from more than one source?
Yes, you can match fund with using other grants as well. And also volunteer time as well. That's a big thing in grants. Some grants you can't get 100% funding, so you have to find other sources of funding to do the work that you want to do. So you can match fund with gifts in kind, volunteer labour, as well as also any other pots of money that you get from other grants.
Thank you, Emma. So I don't know if we've got any more questions coming through. Just while we wait, we just thought we'd let you know that our next training session is going to be at Flatford Wildlife Garden on Wednesday the 10th of May, and that is at 6:30 in the evening. And everybody will have the opportunity to come and learn how to build a stag beetle pyramid, do some dead hedging, and also learn how to build a big bug hotel. And also, while you are carrying out those activities and learning how to make them, we'll also be going through some risk assessments and showing you how to fill them in, and all the health and safety that you would have to consider as well. So if you do want to join us on Wednesday the 10th of May, I believe you all have Emma Black's email address. So if you could email her and let her know you'd like to come, that would be really helpful. We'd like to say thank you for joining us. If you have got any feedback for how this evening went, please pop it into the chat bar, or you can email Emma again. Oh, and I think we've just heard from Colin. He's just come through with a message again. It's, if constituted, does the group need, who does the group need to register with?
So
Danielle, would you be able to answer that?
Yeah, of course. So to become constituted, you don't actually need to register anywhere. The kind of most important part is about getting a bank account. So that's when you take all of your constitution and any of those extra policies and documents that I spoke about to that, and they're in place as well for things like funding. So there isn't a specific place you register with, but if you're thinking specifically about the Friends of group formal structure, there is a national federation that you can register to, which is really helpful because there's already 7,000 on there, so lots of information. So yeah, that should be, I think, it.
Thank you everybody for the feedback, saying it was interesting and very informative. This is the first time we've put something like this together, so I'm glad you found it useful. We have got a couple more minutes if anybody did want to type a question in. Doesn't look like anybody else has got any more questions. So we just want to say thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we'll look forward to seeing you on Wednesday the 10th of May.